It's now 100 years since the end of the First World War. A conflict that claimed the lives of over 750,000 British men. Now, featuring rare and previously unseen personal testimony, alongside newly restored archive film, this groundbreaking 3-part series will tell the story of the Great War as never before. From the suffering and sacrifice experienced by the men on the front line.
The corpses there, they all had rats' nests in the cage of the chest. And when you disturbed them, the rats ran out of the chest. You can't forget things like that.
To the dramatic change in women's lives on the home front.
I felt when I was working on munitions, I really thought, well, I haven't got any brothers to go and fight, I'm doing the next best thing, and I was quite pleased to be able to do it.
In this film, we'll hear about the terrible battles of 1917 and 18.
To go through Passchendaele, it's to go through hell. That's no other way of putting it.
And we'll find out how Britain turned a looming defeat into victory.
It was a case of chasing the Germans. We knew they were going back and we just followed them. We thought we were winning the war, all right. There was no doubt about that.
This is the story of the tragedy and turmoil of Britain's Great War. Most of the British soldiers who'd fought on the Somme in 1916 were volunteers. But as recruitment levels at home fell, the government introduced conscription, initially for single men aged between 18 and 41. One of these conscripts would go on to become an iconic figure, the last survivor of the trenches. He was discovered living in a Somerset nursing home in the late 1990s, from where he told the story of his war for the very first time.
I didn't want to join up, no. No, I came from a very sheltered family, and I was the youngest of 3 brothers. I didn't want to go, but it was a case of had to. I mean, why should I go out and kill somebody I never knew? For what reason? There was no reason at all in it, in my way of thinking. I was put on the Lewis gun. Number 2. Number 1 had the gun, number 2 the spare parts, and the other 3 were ammunition carriers. You were a team, and that was it.
By May 1916, married men were being conscripted too, so more children were separated from their fathers.
Oh, it was terrible days, terrible days. My father said to my mother, "Oh, I've got to go. My group is called up and I've got to go tomorrow." And of course, she was very, very upset. And us 2 children, oh well, the end of the world had come for us with Daddy gone.
Within a year, around half of all new recruits were conscripts. They would arrive on the Western Front to fight alongside Britain's seasoned soldiers in one of the most infamous battles of the entire war.
To go through Passchendaele, You to go through hell. That's another way of putting it. You went through hell. A man that's been through on Passchendaele, he's been through hell.
Passchendaele. The most terrible war, under terrible conditions, the like of which nobody will ever see again. To see the conditions, let alone the actual fighting, that we had to fight in, would say, well, it's impossible.
After 2 previous battles and 120,000 British casualties, the Belgian market town of Ypres was in Allied hands. But to the south and east, German forces occupied a series of ridges overlooking a salient, a bulge in the line that left the Allies exposed to enfilading fire and artillery bombardment. The plan was to capture these ridges in a series of attacks beginning in the summer of 1917. They would eventually lead northeast of Hooge to the village of Passchendaele. But years of bombardment, combined with unseasonably heavy rainfall, had turned the low-lying battlefields into a quagmire.
Passchendaele was awful. It was, I think, about the worst place I remember ever going through. It seemed to be just like a mass of shell holes. And they were filled with water. Actually, there's all sorts of people who apparently got drowned in them different ways. We were always told that when we were going up or coming back, if a fellow fell into a shell hole which was filled with water, leave him there. Because it was liquid mud. If you tried to get him out, you'd go in yourself, and that was it. It had been so shelled, what they had to do was put down what they call duck boards. There's these stretching boards going across, look like ladders of thick wood. And they put 3 sections of those across, made which used to walk on. And it's so dangerous walking along those duck boards because you could easily slip off.
The conditions were hopeless. The mud was almost ankle deep. If you dropped down with your rifle, you'd find out your rifle was useless with mud. And I think the machine gunners, they must have been the same. If they dropped their gun, it would be out of action with mud. The whole situation was just a nightmare.
The guns themselves sank up to the top of the wheels, so we had to get them out by hand. Poor horses, they were covered up to right up to the bellies in mud. And as fast as you shoveled it away, the mud had come back again, you see. When they couldn't get out, an officer had come along and with his revolver and shoot it. They wouldn't be bothered trying to get it out.
Despite the conditions, there was good reason to launch an offensive east of Ypres. Victory would give the Allies access to a vital railway junction at Roulers and to the channel ports of Ostend and Zeebrugge, home to the German U-boat fleet. From early in the war, these U-boats had been targeting merchant ships that brought vital supplies to Britain. By the beginning of 1917, their attacks had intensified as Germany attempted to starve the British into surrender.
My mother and grandmother used to go out in the fields, with the permission of the farmers, of course, and pick the greens off the turnips and the swedes, take them home and cook them with potatoes and mash it up with margarine. That was our Sunday dinner. Mother used to say, eat it up and imagine that you're having a nice roast dinner. And we made ourselves believe it. And it went down good because we were hungry.
Throughout the summer and autumn of 1917, the Allies inched eastwards from Ypres toward the village of Passchendaele. But fighting through the mud against an enemy on higher ground meant heavy casualties.
It was pure hell as far as I was concerned, because if you stood erect to go forward with your gun ready to fire, your rifle, you'd have been shot down by machine guns. They were just sweeping back and forward with their machine guns. They were just targets.
We had one young officer, and I saw this officer. What was left of his face was shot away. He'd been hit by the full burst of a German machine gun. He must have got about 6 or 7 bullets. He'd no face left.
If anybody tells you they went over the top and they weren't scared, then no, he's not telling you the truth.
Discover the past with exclusive military history documentaries and ad-free podcasts presented by world-renowned historians, all on History Hit. Watch them on your smart TV or on the go with your mobile device. Download the app now to watch everything, from the gripping story of the Band of Brothers to Operation Barbarossa and D-Day. Immerse yourself in the dramatic stories of this remarkable era by signing up via the link in the description.
I know I was. I was scared stiff.
And when you saw a friend struck down with a terrible leg wound, and you, under instructions, you can't go to him, that was really when we feel that we'd lost something that could never be put back. His screams, sometimes, really, I could hear now.
The Third Battle of Ypres ended on the 10th of November 1917, when Canadian forces captured what was left of the village of Passchendaele. By that time, Allied casualties totaled over 325,000 men.
The whiz-bang came over. I saw the flash. You don't hear any sound from it. You simply see the flash. And I didn't know I'd been hit until some minutes after, when the pain came back. And then I could see the blood. We were 5 of us in the team. Number 1 got away with it, but the other fellows, they must have been right back where the shell burst, really, and they must have been blown to pieces with it. But they never found anything of them. They took the whole blast of the shell.
In 1917, just before my 9th birthday, a messenger came on a bicycle, because in those days, I suppose, it was a telegram boy with like a pillbox hat, all red, and brought a telegram to say, I think it just said, killed in action. The shock sort of stopped our life for a little while, you know, really. In the sitting room, Mum had this great big picture on the wall of Dad in his uniform, head and shoulders, and she just turned it round the other way, probably because it upset her to see it every time she went in the room, you see. Mum had to go out to work to earn some money. So at 9 years old, I was left with the family to look after. I had a brother a year younger than me, and there were 3 girls younger than him, and then a young baby, very young, who was used to worry me a lot because it cried. You couldn't show any emotion because of the younger children. So I used to sort of go to bed and cry my eyes out, cry myself to sleep with it all, you know, really.
Back on the Western Front, winter had arrived. And in the freezing conditions, it was a struggle for the men just to keep warm.
I sat on the horse one day. I was absolutely perished cold, you know, waiting there. And a shell come very, very near and burst about 6 feet from the ground. Huge ball of fire. And I thought, oh, if it had only come a bit closer, I could have warmed my hands on it. I can remember that as plain as anything. I thought if it had come any closer, it would have blown me to pieces.
They were summoned from the hillside, they were called in from the glen, and the country found them ready at the stirring call for men.
You heard of trench feet, didn't you? That's where the water and mud got up between the boot and the putty, and then went into the boot. So their boots, their feet really were in cold mud and slud.
The slump came on the instep of my left foot mainly. The right foot wasn't so bad. Came up about the size of a golf ball. Just dirt collecting, pus. So it sent me down to hospital, and the 2 Australian doctors had a look at it and noticed the corporal with them, their assistant, something to them, and passed on. So the next day they came round and they had a look at it. The whole thing had burst open. And they said, oh, well, Jock, he says, that saved us a big job. So they passed on, and I beckoned to the corporal. I said, what do they mean by a big job? He looked at his list. Oh, your left leg was due for amputation below the knee.
With the spring came a bigger problem. Rumours that the Germans were about to launch a full-scale attack. Along the lines, the Allies made defensive preparations.
Out in the front of our line, their bullet court, they'd been sending up a working party of a night with engineers in charge and digging out in the front of the front line a small extra trench. And that trench was going to be occupied solely by a few snipers. We were sent out there to occupy that trench because they were anticipating the German attack the next day. And then the morning came, and about 6 to 7 o'clock in the morning, the Germans opened up, as anticipated, the big barrage.
The German spring offensive began on the 21st of March. Bolstered by 50 divisions of troops, redeployed to the Western Front after the end of the campaign in Russia. Their objective was to win the war before the arrival of the Americans. The attack was swift, led by groups of elite stormtroopers, trained to bypass the front line to attack Allied headquarters and artillery units at the rear, while the trenches were overwhelmed by a second wave of German infantrymen.
They came from the back of us, you know, where our line used to be. They simply came there with loudspeakers shouting out, you're more outmanned or something or other, and I could hear it down the road, and throw your arms down and we won't fire.
One came straight for me. I put down my gun, and he got a fixed bayonet. He come rushing straight up to me, and from that moment on, I said goodbye. There was no more of me. That was the finish. I expected that bayonet to go straight into me, but it didn't. Strange enough, when he got up to me, he stopped. And the thing he said to me was, "Cigarette, comrade?" I nearly dropped to the ground with surprise. Cigarette? I thought he wants a cigarette. So I felt in my pocket where I carried a little tin of ready-made cigarettes. And I said, yes. And he took some of them, and he put them in his pocket, and then I put the tin back. And he says, loose there, loose there, loose there. Pointed to our equipment, everything we got, to take it off and drop it down and leave it and get off over the top. That's what he was trying to tell us. So, of course, we could do no more. And that was my birthday, the 21st of March, 1918.
In some places, the British trenches were shelled with mustard gas.
Closes your eyes to begin with, and it chokes you. That's the first effect you feel. You feel choking. Your throat's got it, and you can't breathe very well. And you try to vomit, that's another thing. That's the main symptoms of being gassed. And anything else that's moist will get it. It clings to it. And it seems to bore its way into you. You just lean forward and try to draw it up from your inside. Try to draw the poison out. You think it says it, but nothing comes up. I had to go give in and go to get medical attention. And when I got there were about 20 or more there, all the same, lying on the ground, screaming, some of them shouting.
Those not lucky enough to get away were held prisoner in makeshift camps.
I got carted off. They put us in a field And we hadn't been there long, and a voice said, if there's anybody knows how to deal with wounded, we'd be very pleased if they'd volunteer to go in the church, which has had quite a number of wounded in there for 6 days. We've done what we could, but we've got our own people to look at. So I said, I'll go. All the length of this place, it was nothing but people laying on the floor. British. I started on them. And at any rate, the next morning, the sergeant came, and he came up there. He said to me, he said, my first mission, he said, is to thank you on behalf of my commanding officer. He said, and if he was here himself, he'd like to shake your hand for volunteering to do this job.
After Bill had helped German medics to move the wounded onto wagons, something extraordinary happened, and it was captured in a remarkable photograph.
I was invited to a celebration for their big victory, and they all shouted out Willem, because that's the nearest they get to William. And they were cheering and shouting and go ahead, and oh, people were coming shaking hands with me. And then the Sergeant Major, he announced the fact that they were going to honour me for making me a sergeant, and that if I gave an order, their men would obey it. And that's why I was made sergeant. I was honorary sergeant. And those fellas went wild. They cheered.
But the special treatment wouldn't last, and Bill joined the rest of those captured in the advance.
The next day, they marched us off, just as we were, till we got to a railway line. When we got to a railway line, we had to wait, and along came a great long row of cattle trucks. And there they forced us into these cattle trucks. We had to go into them with about 30 or 40 in a truck. They packed us all in as fast as they could till we passed, because we must have filled the train. For the train kept moving and it moving. And we were in that train without anything to eat or drink for about 2 days. Till finally we got out of a station, and that station was in Germany.
75,000 British men were taken prisoner in the spring offensive, and almost 200,000 were killed or wounded. Within weeks, the German army had made the greatest advance of any side since 1914, even forcing the Allies to give up the ground they'd fought so hard to win at Passchendaele. Given the enormous losses and the urgent need for reinforcements, the minimum age for British soldiers to serve overseas was reduced from 19 to 18 and a half, and thousands more young men were now called upon to fight.
On the 21st of March, the German big attack started. On the 24th, our training ceased, cut off just like that. We were equipped for the front. The general had told us we were inspected in a big park in Norwich. Then he got up on his dais and he said, "You men? Well, of course, I know that you're not men, you're only boys. But the Germans have broken through our fortifications and you're needed at the front at once." He said, "You've got to play the part of men." We didn't think of the danger.
After nearly 4 years of fighting, Britain was at crisis point, both on the Western Front and at home.
I was very worried as a little girl. I really wondered what was going to happen. I thought this man, Kaiser, was going to come over and take England. And my mother used to say, don't worry, if the Germans do get here, they're not going to have us. She said, I'll kill you and myself. No, she said, no German's going to have you, don't you worry. It's being short of food made us think that it wouldn't be long before the Germans would be over here. And my mother, I don't know how she managed. It was nothing to see her sit at the table with an empty plate. Mummy, you're not eating. Well, I'm not hungry. Whatever she had was for my brother and myself.
Across the country, rationing was introduced as food stocks fell desperately low. And while many people relied on government-backed public canteens, which provided subsidized meals, others found help closer to home.
Money was short, but we were surrounded by, I suppose, good neighbours. And I used to go to the baker's and get shillings worth of bread. You got yesterday's bread. 3 loaves for a shilling. Or to the local grocer, where you got 6 penn'orth of bacon bones. Hopefully there was a lot of bacon left on them. Because you boiled that, you see, with different vegetables. I think we were very lucky, really. I suppose in a way, the butcher and different people knew us, perhaps felt sorry for us, had known my dad, who was popular, and we used to get all these things, so we were very lucky.
Meanwhile, back on the Western Front, Britain's new recruits were getting their first taste of action.
We were sorted out and started to march, and it was dusk. And in the front, we could see the flickering and star shells going up. And then we saw a plane coming towards us. Could see a black outline in the darkish sky. And Corporal Hobson, a regular soldier, he said, "Don't worry, lads, it's one of ours." And then the bombs dropped. We'd just passed an empty trench, so we turned round and scuttled back, and Corporal Hobson got a bit pushed. And he said, "I thought I'd brought some men up the line, not a lot of bloody scared kids." That settled us. We never showed fear again.
In Germany, British prisoners of war were facing hardships of a different kind, as many were forced into slave labour.
You'd be working at a camp, and the slightest thing that had gone wrong, the guards used to get annoyed. And then you'd probably get a bang with a rifle butt, which anybody who's had it know that's very painful. It's painful in the start, but it's damn sight worse by the next morning because it's stiff as a board. And they still expected you to go and do whatever you were doing.
They gave us half a loaf of bread every 5th day. German bread was very brown, very dark. Half a loaf of bread and make it last for 5 days. Yeah, make it last for 5 days, half a loaf of bread. It don't seem possible, but it was so. Yeah. Working on empty belly. Seems phenomenal, doesn't it? Yeah, but that is true.
Dinner time, they used to go around with a can to the cookhouse, and the Germans were eating themselves the mangelwurzels, and we were given the water that they were cooked in. in these tins as a drink, and they were supposed to be nourishing for you. That was our midday meal. That was our ration for the day. And I lost over 2 stone easily. Might have been more. I was nearly falling to pieces.
In August 1918, the war on the Western Front took a different turn. By then, the German offensive had ground to a halt, as they'd advanced so quickly, their supply line couldn't keep up. And in 3 months of fighting, they'd lost nearly 700,000 men, mostly from their elite divisions. Now, with the arrival of the Americans giving them strength in numbers, the Allies counterattacked.
It was a case of chasing the Germans. We knew they were going back and we just followed them. We thought we were winning the war, all right. There was no doubt about that. Because we couldn't imagine the Germans going back if they weren't, if they didn't think they were losing the war. Oh, it was a treat. Once we got out of about the middle of October, we were on the beautiful roads. It was a treat to march after them, not crossing country.
And I took prisoners in October, and I was all alone. And I came to a red brick farm, which hadn't been damaged. See, where we'd come from, it was all wrecked places. So I thought, well, I'm going in here to see. I went in and I found that they'd taken refuge in there, and they put their hands up as soon as they saw me. It was an easy capture. I was completely in charge. In the army, you've got men under you and you've got officers and sergeant majors over you. But the war was mine. It was my personal war that morning. That's how I felt.
With the war once again mobile, the cavalry led the way. Horsemen who'd spent much of their time in the trenches were now back in the saddle, witnessing the collapse of the German army.
Well, we got them on the run. They'd thrown their arms away and given in, you see, my men. And we were passing 10, 20, 50. Kaput, kaput. Kaput means finished, see? Kaput, they're done. Kaput, you've had it. Yeah, I remember that, kept putting the hands up. Kaput, kaput.
Within a month, the Germans had retreated to defensive positions along what was known as the Hindenburg Line. But this too fell in October, as the Allies continued their advance, liberating towns and villages as they went. Finally, after more than 4 years of fighting, and with around 40 million military and civilian casualties worldwide, Germany surrendered. It was the 11th of November, 1918.
We got word the war was finished. And we happened to be, at that point, we're outside a convent or a nunnery, and all the nuns came out with flowers, bunches of flowers. I think there must have been chrysanthemums at that time of the year. And they decorated our company with them, pushed them in our rifles, and that we went along with singing songs, the war is over.
My first thought was very selfish. I thought, so I'm going to live. You've got to be for months on the sign of my life belongs to my country. They can have it any time. You see, I can't stop it. I can't say I've had enough. I'm going home, or can I have a fortnight off? But now, I'm going to have a life. I needn't fear that I shan't survive. I have survived.
When the end of the war come, the village went mad. I don't think there was one person in their home. Everyone was out in the streets, and the band was playing, and the people were all dancing, no matter who they were, whether you knew them or not. And the streets was covered in decorations and, Union Jacks hanging out everybody's windows. Oh, it was a wonderful time. I can remember that.
At the end of the war, I was quite happy that we were intact. So many families had been destroyed. The men had gone, the fathers, the brothers, the sons had gone, but we were intact. We had survived, and I think I was thankful.
This German officer he was in the habit of coming out and calling us in German Schweinhunds. These are the Schweinhunds. He used to call us Schweinhunds every time, never addressed us any other way. But on this particular morning, we were all brought out on parade in the middle of the camp. And the first thing when he got up, and his first word he said was, "Gentlemen." He addressed us. He called us gentlemen. And he told us the war was over. You ought to have heard the noise. Oh, I felt like nothing on earth. I thought, what's it going to be like to be home just to see my people again, you know, to be free. Oh, I couldn't believe it. When I came home and I saw my sisters and my mother, I nearly had a fit. I didn't know what to say. I nearly dropped. Oh, it was marvellous. To be home again and be free, you know, I couldn't believe it.
The first person I saw was my dad going to work. Of course, he down to us and he told his workmates, tell them I'm not coming home to Armistice. Tell them why. And I went home. Of course, my mother was there. She couldn't believe it, her own eyes when she saw me. I think she thought she'd lost me for good. Poor mother.
We didn't know my father was coming home. We just walked in, and the screams of delight. We hung all around him, you know, we wouldn't let him go, and he had a beard. Very soon shaved it off, though, but he had a beard, and he looked to me rough, you know, really rough. And we made a terrible fuss of him. Yeah, we were pleased to see him. I was a proper daddy's little girl.
Between 1914 and 1918, around 6 million British men were mobilized to fight in the First World War. A lifetime later, their reflections on their experiences are as different as the men themselves.
I wouldn't volunteer again to do it. They'd have to call me up and do something, I don't know. We thought it was going to be a lovely little game, you know, but it wasn't. It was wicked. Wicked. Sacrifice of young lives for nothing.
We all had great fun, really. Tremendous fun. Enjoyed ourselves. I personally enjoyed the Ruddy War, I think. I don't know why, but it was great fun.
I was happy. I knew I did something for my country. I felt happy and I still feel happy. But yes, I still feel very happy that I was in that war and that came out. Because as we say, if it hadn't been for us, a lot of people wouldn't be here today. And I still maintain that. Some of those fellas gave their lives so that other people could live. And I'm still content that they saved us all, they saved the country.
The reality of life in the trenches during the Great War is now beyond living memory. But as this invaluable collection of interviews reveals, the most common shared experience among British veterans was the pain felt for lost friends. 80 years after George Littlefair's best friend Joe Coates was killed, he returned to the Western Front to visit his grave for the first time.
He was a grand lad, and I'm not afraid to tell you, when I was looking at his grave, I was running tears down my face. Memory coming, I'm not afraid to say it. Aye. Aye. Because we were bosom pals. And he had to get a dirty lump of shrapnel. What we were going to do, what we were going to have when we got back out of the forces. Poor Joe.
Harry Patch lived to be 111 years old. He was Britain's last surviving Tommy.
I should never forget the 3 I lost behind me. That upsets me more than anything. September the 22nd. That is my Remembrance Day, not Armistice Day. All was very, very quiet on that day.
After surviving the battles of the Somme and Passchendaele, Ted Francis recalled a eulogy written to honour lost friends.
Spotty was my pal, he was. A ginger-headed bloke. An everlasting gas bag and as stubborn as a moke. He gave us all up, he did, afore he came to war, by sporting all his bits of French, what no one asked him for. Where we went to, nobody knows, and it wasn't like the fighting, as you see in picture shows. We had days of hell together, till they told us to retire, and Spotty's flown language set the water carts on fire. We were lying down in a hole, yes, dug with our very hands, for you gets it quick and sudden if you move about or stands. We were sharing half a fag, yes, turn and turn about, when I felt he moved towards me. And he said, "Odd mate, I'm out." His eyes, they couldn't see me, nor never will, no more. But his twisted mouth just whispered, "So long, matey. Au revoir." But there was none quite the same to me, 'cause him and me were pals. And if I could have him back again, you could keep your fancy gals. But he's talking French in heaven now, so it's no use feeling sore. But God knows how I miss him. So long, Spotty. Au revoir.